The hearing room was packed, the air thick with anticipation and the hum of 100 cameras. It was supposed to be a routine session on judicial reform, but the energy in the chamber said otherwise. Reporters lined the walls, their phones ready to capture every second. Congressional staffers whispered predictions about fireworks. Even the committee chair seemed to sense that something was about to break loose. At the witness table sat Judge Andrew Napolitano, the 74-year-old former Fox News legal analyst, his silver hair perfectly combed, his suit immaculate, his reputation as a constitutional expert preceding him. He'd spent decades on television, dissecting the law for millions, and he carried himself with the confidence of someone used to being the smartest person in the room. Across from him, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett sat quietly, her hands folded, her eyes fixed on the judge. At 43, she was already a force in Washington, a civil rights attorney turned lawmaker, known for her sharp questioning and refusal to back down. She'd built her career in Dallas courtrooms, defending the voiceless, and she brought that same tenacity to Congress. Today, she was ready. Napolitano began his testimony with the gravitas of a man who'd spent years commanding attention. For 20 minutes, he spoke without interruption, his voice echoing through the chamber. He criticized the current administration's judicial appointments, calling them political hacks and unqualified activists. He dismissed concerns about diversity on the bench as identity politics over merit. Some committee members nodded along, others shifted uncomfortably. Crockett sat still, taking notes, her expression unreadable. Then, as Napolitano launched into a tirade against specific judges, calling them DEI hires who didn't belong on the federal bench, Crockett raised her hand. The committee chair recognized her. She stood, her voice calm but clear. "Judge Napolitano, with all due respect, I need to interrupt you there." The room froze. Napolitano's face flushed red. He slammed his hand on the table, the microphone jumping. "Sit down," he roared, pointing a finger at Crockett. "I'm not finished. You will sit down and wait your turn like everyone else." Gasps filled the chamber. Phones shot up. Social media started buzzing. Did a witness just yell at a sitting member of Congress? Did Judge Napolitano just lose his temper on live television? The moment was electric, the kind of unscripted drama that instantly goes viral. But Jasmine Crockett didn't sit down. She stood her ground, microphone in hand, a slight smile playing at the corner of her lips. She'd been preparing for this moment, and what she said next would break the internet. "I will not sit down, Judge Napolitano. And let me tell you why." The room erupted. Murmurs spread through the gallery. Committee members leaned forward. Napolitano's face went from red to purple. Crockett continued, her legal training kicking in. "You are a witness before this committee. I am a member of Congress. You don't get to tell me to sit down. You don't get to tell me when I can speak. And you certainly don't get to yell at me because you don't like being questioned." Applause broke out from some sections of the gallery. The committee chair banged the gavel, calling for order, but the damage was done. Within seconds, clips of the exchange were already spreading on X, TikTok, and Instagram. Napolitano tried to recover. He held up his hand. "I apologize for my tone, but..." "No," Crockett cut him off. "You don't get to butt your way out of this. You came here today and spent 20 minutes attacking judges who aren't here to defend themselves. You called them unqualified. You called them activists. You even called some of them DEI hires." She pulled out a folder from her desk. Papers rustled as she flipped through them. The cameras loved it. This was dramatic television gold. "Let's talk about Judge Maria Rodriguez, one of the judges you called unqualified. Did you know she graduated top of her class from Yale Law School? Did you know she clerked for Justice Sotomayor? Did you know she spent 15 years as a federal prosecutor before her appointment?" Napolitano shifted in his seat. "I was speaking generally about..." "You used her name specifically, Judge. You said she was appointed based on identity rather than merit. Let me ask you something. What are your qualifications to judge her qualifications?" The room fell silent. This was the moment everyone would replay later. Crockett wasn't just defending the judges Napolitano attacked. She was putting him on trial. "You were a state court judge for 8 years, Crockett continued. "That's impressive, but Judge Rodriguez has more federal experience than you ever did. So when you call her unqualified, what you're really saying is that you disagree with her being appointed. And that's fine. You can disagree. But don't pretend your disagreement is based on her qualifications when the record shows otherwise. Republican members of the committee started looking uncomfortable. Even some who'd nodded along during Napolitano's testimony now seemed to realize he'd overstepped. Democratic members were barely containing their smiles. Napolitano tried a different approach. "Congresswoman, I think you're mischaracterizing my testimony." "Am I?" "Let me read your exact words from 10 minutes ago." Crockett looked down at her notes. "These appointments are nothing more than political payback to special interest groups who don't care about judicial excellence." She looked up at him. "Judge Napolitano, are you aware that before President Biden's appointments, only 7% of federal judges were black women, despite black women making up 7% of the population? Are you aware that before these appointments, only 11% of federal judges were Hispanic, despite Hispanic Americans making up 19% of the population?" The statistics hit like hammer blows. Napolitano had no response ready. He'd come prepared to lecture Congress about constitutional theory. He hadn't expected to be cross-examined by someone who actually knew how to do it. "So, when you complain about diversity in appointments," Crockett pressed on, "what you're really complaining about is that the federal bench is finally starting to look like America, and that bothers you. Not because these judges are unqualified, but because they don't look like the judges you're used to seeing." The room erupted again. This time the chair didn't even try to restore order. The moment was too powerful. Crockett had just delivered a devastating blow, and everyone knew it. Napolitano's famous composure had completely crumbled. "That's not what I meant," Napolitano stammered, his voice suddenly small in the cavernous room. But Crockett didn't let up. "Then what did you mean, Judge? Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like you came here today not to provide legal expertise, but to attack judges you disagree with politically. And when someone tries to question you about it, you yell at them to sit down." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. Then she delivered her next escalation. "You know what's ironic, Judge? You spent years on Fox News talking about respecting institutions, respecting the rule of law, respecting the Constitution. But the moment someone questions you, you lose your temper and try to silence them. That's not constitutional scholarship. That's just arrogance." The chamber had gone from shocked silence to barely controlled chaos. Reporters were frantically typing on their phones. Committee members were whispering to their staff. And Judge Andrew Napolitano sat at the witness table looking like a man who just realized he'd walked into an ambush. But Jasmine Crockett wasn't finished. Not even close. "Let me show you something else, Judge Napolitano." She nodded to her staff, and suddenly a screen behind her lit up with an image. It was a clip from Fox News dated 2017. The committee room grew quiet as everyone turned to look. The video showed a younger Napolitano on Fox and Friends, smiling and animated. His voice filled the chamber. "I think it's wonderful that President Trump is appointing younger judges with less experience. Fresh perspectives are exactly what the judiciary needs. We shouldn't be obsessed with checking boxes about credentials. What matters is judicial philosophy." The video stopped. Crockett turned back to Napolitano with a raised eyebrow. "That's you 6 years ago saying credentials don't matter, and experience isn't important. But today you're attacking judges for supposedly lacking qualifications. What changed, Judge?" The exposure was devastating. Napolitano's face had gone from purple to pale. He gripped the edge of the witness table. "That was taken out of context, was it? Let me play another one." Another clip appeared, this time from 2018. Napolitano again praised a Trump judicial nominee who'd never tried a case in federal court. "Experience is overrated," TV Napolitano declared. "What we need are judges who understand the Constitution, not judges with lengthy resumes." Crockett let that one sit for a moment. The silence was crushing. Then she spoke again, her voice sharp as a blade. "So let me get this straight, Judge. When a Republican president appoints young judges with limited experience, you praise it as fresh thinking. But when a Democratic president appoints experienced judges with impressive credentials, you attack them as unqualified. Do you see the problem here?" The room exploded. Republican members were staring at their desks. Democratic members were nodding vigorously. The gallery was a mix of gasps, whispers, and a few scattered cheers that the chair didn't even try to silence this time. Napolitano tried to speak, but his voice cracked. My positions have evolved. Evolved or just changed based on which party is making the appointments. Crockett didn't wait for an answer. She was on a roll now, years of courtroom experience taking over. Let's talk about judicial activism since you brought it up. You've written 9 books about the Constitution, correct? Yes, I have, Napolitano said, trying to regain some authority in his voice. And in those books, you've argued that judges should strictly interpret the Constitution and not legislate from the bench. Right, that's correct. So let me ask you this. When the Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade, was that judicial activism? The question hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. Napolitano knew the trap immediately. If he said yes, he'd contradict his own judicial philosophy. If he said no, he'd have to explain why overturning 50 years of precedent wasn't activism while maintaining other precedents was required. That was correcting a previous act of judicial activism. He finally managed. Crockett smiled. Interesting. So when judges make decisions you agree with, it's correcting activism. But when they make decisions you disagree with, it's activism itself. Is that really your position as a constitutional scholar? The triumph was complete. Napolitano had no good answer. He'd been exposed not just as partisan, but as intellectually dishonest. His reputation as an objective legal expert was crumbling in real time on national television. Then Crockett delivered her knockout blow. Judge Napolitano, you came here today expecting to lecture us about the Constitution. But what you really did was show us that your legal opinions change based on political convenience. You yelled at me to sit down because you couldn't handle being questioned. And you attacked qualified judges because you don't like the president who appointed them. She paused, looking directly into his eyes. You're not a constitutional expert, Judge. You're a political commentator with a law degree, and the American people deserve better than that. The room erupted in applause. The committee chair finally gave up trying to maintain order and simply let it happen. Napolitano sat there completely defeated, his hands trembling slightly as he reached for his water glass. And online, the internet was already exploding. The clip of Napolitano yelling, "Sit down," followed by Crockett's devastating response, was going viral across every platform. Within minutes, hashtags like Jasmine Crockett, the Sit Down Judge, and Napolitano exposed were trending worldwide. The hearing continued for another hour, but everyone knew the real story was already written. The committee eventually excused Judge Napolitano, who left the chamber without speaking to reporters. His usual post-testimony press availability was canceled. His staff hustled him out a side door. Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett's phone was blowing up. Her staff could barely keep up with media requests. CNN, MSNBC, and even some Fox News personalities wanted interviews. But she stayed in the hearing room, finishing her work, asking questions of the remaining witnesses. By the time the hearing ended, the viral moment had taken on a life of its own. On X, formerly Twitter, the main clip had been viewed over 50 million times within the first 6 hours. The hashtag #JockerSitDown was trending not just in the United States but globally. Users from around the world were sharing the video with commentary. This is what happens when you assume someone won't fight back. Jasmine Crockett just gave a masterclass in standing your ground. Judge Napolitano thought he could intimidate a civil rights attorney from Texas. LOL. He had no idea who he was dealing with. She didn't just beat him in an argument. She exposed his entire career of partisan hackery with receipts. This is legendary. TikTok users created thousands of reaction videos. The clip was remixed with dramatic music. Someone made a version that froze on Napolitano's face right after Crockett refused to sit down, with the text, "He knew he'd messed up." That version alone got 30 million views. Instagram was flooded with quotes from Crockett's questioning, laid over dramatic backgrounds. You're not a constitutional expert. You're a political commentator with a law degree. It became an instant meme, applied to everyone from cable news pundits to YouTube legal analysts. Cable news couldn't get enough of the story. MSNBC ran the clip every hour. Rachel Maddow dedicated a segment to analyzing Crockett's tactical brilliance in the questioning. Legal experts praised her technique. What you saw today was a skilled attorney doing what skilled attorneys do. said Jeffrey Toobin on CNN. She came prepared with evidence. She anticipated his defenses. She had the clips ready to impeach his credibility. This was a prosecution-level cross-examination. Even some conservative outlets had to acknowledge what happened. The National Review ran a piece titled, "When Witnesses Attack, Why Napolitano's Outburst Backfired." The article noted that regardless of one's political views, yelling at a member of Congress during testimony was never a good strategy. Fox News. Napolitano's former employer was notably quiet. They ran a brief mention of the hearing, but didn't show the full exchange. Former Fox personalities reached out to Napolitano privately, warning him that his reputation as a legal expert had taken serious damage. Within days, the political implications became clear. Democrats seized on the moment as evidence that Republican criticisms of Biden's judicial appointments were based on partisanship rather than legitimate concerns about qualifications. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer cited the hearing in floor speeches defending judicial nominees. Judge Napolitano's testimony and Congresswoman Crockett's response showed the American people what we've known all along. These attacks on qualified judges are not about credentials. They're about politics. Republicans found themselves in an uncomfortable position. Some distanced themselves from Napolitano's comments. Others tried to defend him, but struggled to explain away the video evidence of his inconsistent positions. For Jasmine Crockett, the moment transformed her profile dramatically. Overnight, she went from a respected but relatively unknown freshman congresswoman to a national figure. Her fundraising exploded. Within a week, her campaign had raised over $3 million from small donors across the country. Speaking requests flooded in. Law schools wanted her to speak about her career. Civil rights organizations wanted to honor her. Democratic Party leaders began mentioning her name as a rising star to watch. But beyond the political scorekeeping, the moment revealed something deeper about American politics and media in 2025. For decades, experts like Napolitano had operated with a certain immunity. Their credentials and television presence gave them authority that often went unchallenged. They could make sweeping claims, attack people's qualifications, and face little pushback. But the new generation of politicians, raised on social media and comfortable with confrontation, wasn't willing to give that same deference. Crockett represented a shift in how politics works. She came with receipts. She wasn't intimidated by reputation, and she knew how to turn a hostile moment into a viral victory. Legal experts noted another important aspect of the exchange. Crockett's questioning highlighted ongoing debates about judicial diversity, qualifications, and what constitutes activism on the bench. Her point about the lack of diversity in the federal judiciary before recent appointments was backed by data that couldn't be easily dismissed. This moment mattered because it forced a conversation about who gets to be a judge and why, said Professor Melissa Murray of NYU Law School. For too long, diversity was treated as somehow opposed to excellence. What Congresswoman Crockett showed is that the judges being attacked actually have exceptional credentials. The criticism was never about qualifications. It was about maintaining a status quo that excluded certain voices. In the weeks following the hearing, several things happened. Judge Napolitano largely disappeared from public view. He canceled several scheduled speaking engagements. His podcast, Judging Freedom, saw a significant drop in listeners. Some outlets that regularly featured him as a legal expert quietly stopped booking him. Jasmine Crockett appeared on multiple cable news shows, where she continued to advocate for judicial reform and defend the qualifications of recent appointees. She also used the platform to discuss her own background as a civil rights attorney. The Senate confirmed 3 more federal judges who had been targets of similar attacks, with several Republican senators citing the hearing as evidence that criticisms were overblown. Law schools added the exchange to their courses on effective cross-examination and witness control. Multiple professors told their students to study Crockett's technique. The clip became a recruiting tool for young people interested in law and politics, particularly young women, and people of color who saw themselves in Crockett's refusal to back down. Several key lessons emerged from this viral moment. First, preparation matters. Crockett didn't just react emotionally to Napolitano's outburst. She had evidence ready. She knew his past statements. She understood the data about judicial diversity. Her effectiveness came from being thoroughly prepared. Second, standing your ground works. Many people in Crockett's position would have apologized and sat down when Napolitano yelled. By refusing to be intimidated, she took control of the moment and turned it to her advantage. Third, receipts are powerful. In the age of social media, people can and will find your past statements. Napolitano's credibility was destroyed because Crockett had video evidence of his contradictory positions. Consistency matters, especially for those who claim expertise. Fourth, institutional knowledge matters. Crockett's background as a practicing attorney gave her skills that many politicians lack. She knew how to cross-examine. She knew how to build a case. She knew how to destroy a witness's credibility. That expertise translated directly to her effectiveness in Congress. Finally, moments like this matter in shaping political narratives. The debate about judicial appointments and diversity on the federal bench had been going on for years. But this single exchange did more to frame that debate in the public consciousness than thousands of policy papers or press releases. As this story continued to resonate, several questions remained. Would Napolitano be able to rebuild his reputation as a legal expert? Or had this moment permanently damaged his credibility? Early signs suggested the damage might be lasting. Several conservative legal organizations that previously featured him as a speaker quietly removed him from their websites. How would this moment affect Jasmine Crockett's political career? With her profile dramatically raised, speculation had already begun about her future. Could she run for Senate? Could she seek statewide office in Texas? Party leaders were certainly taking notice of her effectiveness and her ability to go viral for the right reasons. What did this mean for how congressional hearings would be conducted? The old model of witnesses lecturing Congress with little pushback seemed to be over. The new generation of members, armed with research staff and social media savvy, was more willing to challenge and confront witnesses, especially when those witnesses were clearly partisan. Most importantly, what did this moment tell us about changing power dynamics in American politics? The old gatekeepers, whether they were judges, television personalities, or political commentators, no longer commanded automatic respect. Credentials still mattered, but they didn't provide immunity from tough questioning. And when someone overplayed their hand, the internet would make sure everyone knew about it. The moment when Judge Andrew Napolitano yelled, "Sit down," at Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett would be remembered as one of the defining viral moments of 2025. Not just because of the drama, though there was plenty of that, but because it represented a larger shift in how politics works in the digital age. It showed that expertise without evidence is just opinion. That television fame doesn't guarantee respect. That preparation and skill can overcome institutional power. And that standing your ground, even when someone tries to intimidate you, can turn a hostile moment into a triumph. For Jasmine Crockett, the moment proved what her supporters had long known. She wasn't just a politician reading from talking points. She was a skilled attorney, a fierce advocate, and someone who would fight when fighting mattered. Her refusal to sit down became a metaphor for a generation refusing to accept the old rules, the old power structures, and the old ways of doing things. For Judge Napolitano, the moment served as a harsh reminder that reputation is built over years, but can be damaged in seconds, that losing your temper on national television is never a good look, and that if you're going to attack people's qualifications, you better make sure your own arguments are consistent and defensible. As the video continued to circulate, as the hashtags continued to trend, as law professors continued to use it as a teaching tool, one thing was clear. This was more than just a viral moment. It was a turning point, a sign of changing times and proof that in the age of social media, every moment counts, every word matters, and preparation plus courage can defeat arrogance and authority. The question now wasn't whether Judge Napolitano should have sat down. The question was who would be the next person to learn that underestimating Jasmine Crockett was a very, very bad idea. In the weeks that followed, Crockett's star only rose higher. She was invited to speak at universities, legal conferences, and civil rights events across the country. Her story was featured in major magazines, and her approach to cross-examination became a case study in law schools. Young women and aspiring attorneys wrote to her by the thousands, sharing how her refusal to be silenced inspired them to pursue their own ambitions. Crockett responded to as many as she could, always emphasizing the importance of preparation, integrity, and never letting anyone else define your worth. Meanwhile, the political world took note. Crockett's colleagues in Congress began to emulate her style, coming to hearings armed with facts, video clips, and a willingness to challenge even the most established experts. The old deference to authority was fading, replaced by a new expectation. If you want to be taken seriously, you'd better be ready to defend your record, your words, and your logic. The media, too, began to shift. News outlets started prioritizing substance over spectacle, knowing that audiences were hungry for real accountability, not just viral drama. The Crockett-Napolitano exchange became a template for how to hold power to account in the digital age. With facts, with poise, and with the courage to stand tall when it matters most. For Napolitano, the fallout was lasting. He issued a public apology days later, but the damage was done. His invitations to speak dwindled. His podcast struggled to regain its audience. The legal community, once eager to hear his opinions, now viewed him with skepticism. The lesson was clear. In the new era of politics, no one is above scrutiny, and no one is immune to the consequences of their words and actions. As the dust settled, the legacy of that day in the hearing room became clear. Jasmine Crockett's standing reply wasn't just a viral moment. It was a declaration of a new standard for public discourse. It was a reminder that courage, preparation, and authenticity can change the narrative, shift the balance of power, and inspire a generation to demand more from their leaders. And so, as the world watched, a single moment of defiance echoed far beyond the walls of Congress. It became a rallying cry for anyone who's ever been told to sit down, to wait their turn, or to stay quiet. Jasmine Crockett's reply was more than a comeback. It was a promise that the future belongs to those who stand up, speak out, and refuse to be silenced.